Hey everybody, welcome back to Chanel's Crohn's and Colitis channel, where we talk all things Crohn's and colitis. My name is Chanel, and today I wanted to give an update on everything that's been going on with my situation, and I figured while we wait for next steps, now would be a good time to make a video about my whole backstory, about living with ulcerative colitis for the last 23 years. So it's probably going to be a little on the longer side. I do have 23 years to cover. I will put chapters in this video, so if anything specifically interests you for any of the ages or years of my life, you can definitely click through the chapters there. Poe wants to say hi. He's the culprit of all the barking in the other videos. Hopefully he behaves himself today. Say hi, Poe. Hi, Poe. Okay, so a little update about what's been going on currently. I got sent the information about the clinical trial. The information I got sent is not about the clinical trial where they use your own blood. I got the information sent to me about the stem cell study, which is another potential option, but I am also interested in the blood study. So I'm waiting to see if they send me info on that as well. My next steps are deciding, whether I just go all in and do this clinical study and throw all my other plans out the window, or whether I decide to just live with the ceton for a while longer and deal with healing up my fistula, hopefully in a couple years, something like that. I honestly am not too sure at the moment. But as far as how I'm doing, life is back to normal as far as with the ceton. So again, I'm taking advantage, I feel like I have a new lease on life a little bit as far as being able to exercise and just do my normal routine, which if I had gotten the lift surgery, that wouldn't be the case at the moment. So I'm trying to take full advantage of that and look at it as positively as possible. So today, as I mentioned, I wanted to tell a bit of my backstory, or I guess all of my backstory, for any of my new followers online or any friends and family who have maybe met me later in life that don't know the extent of my story, who just want to learn more about it. So I will start 23 years ago, back in the year 2000. My family and I had just gotten back from a month-long vacation in Italy. We were very blessed to be able to do that, and life was great. And the only thing I really remember is shortly after we got back from the trip, I started seeing some blood in my stool. And of course, I was 7 years old at the time, so I told my mom, something's different, something's weird, something's wrong. I'm sure, of course, she was scared, but they took me to CHOC, the Children's Hospital of Orange County. So that is where I got my first colonoscopy. I remember as a 7-year-old, I wasn't really able to do the true prep that you do as an adult for a colonoscopy. So I do remember when I went into CHOC, they did have to do the enema, which was the worst part of it, for sure. Other than that, they put me in a room where I got to pick whatever Disney movie I wanted to play while I was waiting. They gave me this little stuffed chalk bear that I actually still have in my memory box. They just were so nice. I remember all the nurses were so nice, and I was having a great time. I was thrilled to be there. It was kind of like a little retreat day for me, aside from the enema. That was the only really bad part. But I remember being totally okay with everything that was going on because I didn't really know the reality of what was happening. It was just kind of being spoiled a little bit, and then groggy afterwards, and that was that. So the only other thing I really remember is getting that diagnosis that I had ulcerative colitis. So my case, ever since that time and until now, I've really had, the affected area has been at the very bottom of my colon. So right near the rectum. So for a long time, suppositories were the recommended option for me because that area was so close to the rectum. They didn't necessarily want to give me too many oral things because it was just so at the bottom of the tract. They wanted to go about it the more direct way. So after I received my diagnosis, I got my first pediatric gastroenterologist, and he was wonderful. I had this doctor all the way through until I believe I was 20 years old. We were supposed to stop with him when I turned 18, but because he was the head of his department and pretty high up, and we had such a great relationship and such a long history, he kind of kept me as a patient under the rug for a while. I was still getting colonoscopies at pediatric hospitals for a while. I am pretty petite, but when it hit, 18, 19 years old, I think they were looking at me, the staff, like, okay, I think you're done with this place, time to move on. So anyways, I had a wonderful pediatric gastroenterologist. He became very close to me and my mother. I don't want to say he was like a second father, but kind of. He really cared about me and made sure I was taken care of. He would sit me down and tell me, have heart-to-hearts with me about how important it was that I took my medicine, because after I had gotten to my more teenage years of forgetting to take my pills and just not wanting to do it, he would have these sit downs with me like a father and tell me how important it was. He was the first one that ever recommended therapy to me. And my parents at the time were under the thought of, therapies for people who have gone through very traumatic things, and you don't fall under that category. Our thought process on therapists has changed a lot. I think everyone on the planet should have a therapist, but certainly people with a chronic illness. So he was the very first one that kind of told my mother and I that seeing a therapist would be a really good idea. But I've fast forwarded a little bit. To go back to when I was around 7, 8 years old, I couldn't take pills. So again, they started me on the suppositories, but at the time my parents had to administer those, and it was extremely uncomfortable for me. And I just remember, of course, fighting it, really not wanting to do it. I don't remember a lot of details, but I just remember being really miserable about it. So when that wasn't really working out, they put me on Asacol, which is the very first oral medication that I took for my ulcerative colitis. And again, being pretty young, I couldn't swallow pills, so my mom would crush that into applesauce, and I still can't eat applesauce to this day because of it. It was pretty nasty. So I don't know how medications have changed now. At the time, they weren't able to put that medicine into a liquid form. So that was really our only option. I hope now, if you have a child that has ulcerative colitis or has to take some medication, that there's an easier way. So around 2002 or 2003, when I want to say I was around 8 or 9 years old, my doctor came to us with a clinical trial. He told me it was really cool because I could earn like $800. And every day that I did the clinical trial, they gave me a gift card to Borders, which was a bookstore at the time, and I would get DVDs and CDs from there. And my parents, I remember them being a little worried because it was a clinical study about the current medication that I was on, the Asacol, but you got put into 3 groups. You either were given a higher dose, your normal dose, or a lower dose, and they were really only comfortable with me doing it if I was put into the group that had the lower dose or the current dose that I was on. It wasn't one of those clinical studies where you don't know what's happening. They told us which group we got put in after we were randomly selected, and mine was the same dose group. So we went ahead and went through with it. I said, sure, why not? So the process was me and my dad stayed overnight, I believe for 3 nights at this location. It wasn't a hospital. It was some like outpatient center or something like that. I honestly don't know what it was. But what they did is they put a stent in my arm that kept my arm straight for those 3 days. And they put, I don't know the correct medical terminology, but it was a tube that they didn't have to poke me every hour. They could just poke the little foam that was connected to the tube and draw blood from there. So that's why my arm had to stay straight with popsicle sticks, and that tube was kept in there. It really wasn't that uncomfortable, other than I had to keep my arm straight for 3 days and nights. So it was uncomfortable while sleeping. And it was already an unfamiliar area. My dad and I had these like bunk beds in different rooms, and there were other kids there with their parents. But the only time that it really sucked was that tube got clogged because the blood clotted a little bit in it, so they had to change that out. And I remember that being very painful. Also, they had to draw blood every hour, and that was even in the middle of the night when you were sleeping. So they also had us on a strict eating schedule as well, to be able, I think, to track blood sugar and things such as that. So I did pass out a couple of times, especially in the mornings when they would draw the blood before breakfast, and I had super low blood sugar, and I just would pass out a couple times. They'd wake me up, and it was weird, but it was normal for the time and place. But that came and went, so it wasn't a big deal, but I was happy to have contributed, hopefully, towards some research. And then honestly, from that point of my childhood up until high school, it's all pretty vague. My case of ulcerative colitis, because it was so low in the rectum, I have never really had the intense abdominal pain that a lot of people with Crohn's and colitis experience. I never had the intense weight loss that a lot of people experience. If anything, I have always leaned a little more towards the weight gain with this disease, because of different steroids and medications that I've had to take that have made my weight fluctuate. But a lot of the very common typical symptoms of Crohn's or ulcerative colitis that you would see in a lot of patients, I didn't necessarily have. So it was very easy to hide my disease. So I just remember, all through elementary school, middle school, I never talked about it much with my friends. It was an unknown thing. Only my very, very best friends and close family knew about it. If anything, I would just use the restroom a lot more, or be in the restroom for a lot longer than a normal person. But pretty much I would take my medicine as instructed. I wasn't great about it again, so my doctor had to have a couple heart-to-hearts with me, and I believe at that time I was having a colonoscopy every 3 years, so it wasn't every year yet. High school, life started to get a lot more stressful. I had, my first very serious boyfriend. That was my first love and everything, and of course with that comes drama, heartbreak, all the things. So during those tumultuous times emotionally, I flared a lot more than I did in elementary and even middle school. So I would find myself a lot more often in the nurse's office with the abdominal pain. I would see a lot more blood in my stool, and I was just going through it a little more. It was making itself more known in my life than it had all the previous years. So it was starting to kind of take a front seat there in my ride of life more than it had. So I was really grappling at that time with the reality of living with this disease and how that was going to look for the rest of my life. And that's really when I started grieving normal, that, a lot of my friends and just everyone that I knew didn't have to deal with the things I did, didn't have to be on medications like me, didn't have to worry that a stressful occasion or moment was going to send them into a really bad flare and then affect things. So that's when I started really coming to terms with what all of this meant in my life. And that pretty quickly rolled right into going to college in 2011. And that was probably one of the worst flares I've had in my life because of all the stress of moving to a new place, leaving my family, the typical things that come with starting college. So when I started college and I was really in the bad flare, I got put on Prednisone for the very first time. If you don't know what that is, it's a steroid. We call them the devil's Tic Tacs here in this community because they are just awful. They give you insomnia. They don't let you sleep. you get moon face really bad on it. So if I have the technical capability to put photos here in the video, I will try to add pictures of my moon face at the time, but that was really, that took a hit on my self-esteem, having joined college, you know, and you're trying to meet people for the first time, and you just look in the mirror and you don't recognize yourself. So that was not fun, but it did get the flare under control. So was on those for a while, and then finally was able to wean off of them. And then I just pretty much stayed consistent. By that point, Asacol had transitioned into mesalamine. I was just taking the oral pills. I believe I was taking 4 a day. And that was kind of my trajectory for a little while there for the 4 years in college. I would kind of be all right, and then something stressful would happen. My flares have always been extremely brought on by stress, and I would flare again. They would put me on prednisone again, and it was this kind of back and forth. Again, by that point, I had transitioned from my pediatric gastroenterologist to just a very general one that was randomly recommended. And because I was in college, I don't think I was able to really meet them. It was more of a virtual call situation, and there was just that level that I had for the last over 10 years with my pediatric gastroenterologist had disappeared. So I felt a little lost in my diagnosis. I didn't really know what was going on. And when I graduated college, I moved back home and I started waiting tables for a couple years before I moved up to LA and started my, first career job. But for the couple years that I was waiting tables, I started having all these other autoimmune symptoms pop up in my life. So I was getting really bad eczema. I had a horrible hot spot on the back of my neck. And then I even got something called migratory rheumatoid arthritis. All of a sudden, I couldn't move my knee. It was in so much pain. My knee joint would be so on fire that I would be limping everywhere. And I would wake up the next day and it would be in my left big toe. And that would be extremely painful. I'd wake up the next day or maybe even a couple hours later and it would be in my shoulder joint or my finger or my neck. Like it just, I thought I was going crazy because I was like, how is it possible that this is something that each day is moving around different parts of my body? That's absurd. But I talked to my doctor about it, and I guess it's a thing. If you have one autoimmune disease, they tend to come in pairs or even triplets sometime. So that was what was going on with me. I was having a bunch of things happening all at once because I think my disease was in a really bad place at the time. And I also developed a kidney stone. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but that was another moment that was among one of the most painful things I've had to go through, was passing that kidney stone. So all that was happening at the same time, and all that was happening at the same time that I met my now husband. God bless him. He has stuck with me through it all and has loved me through all of it. So if you are one of those people that think you are just so unlovable and your self-esteem is low, just know that there is someone out there that will love you for all your imperfections and all your quirks. So it was actually my husband who was at some coffee shop or something, and he saw a flyer for a team challenge. And I had never heard of it before, but he brought it to me and said, hey, this is what you have, right? Check this out. And Team Challenge is a fundraiser half marathon that is put on by the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. And I was at a time in my life where I said, sure, why not? This seems cool. It's raising money for a foundation, obviously, that is very important to me and may directly help me. And it's also training to run a half marathon. And that sounds like something I want to do in my life. And screw it, let's go for it. Let's do it. So I signed up for Team Challenge. They set up a donation link for you, and I forget the exact amount of money. It may have changed at this point that you have to raise, but you have to meet a certain goal. Otherwise, it does have to come out of your own pocket. So I was a little freaked out about that, but thankfully, again, I have a really supportive network of family and friends, so they were able to help me reach my goal. And at the restaurants I was working for at the time, we had a lot of those fundraisers where 10% of everything made that night would go to my fundraiser and things like that. So that was kind of a fun time in life. But I have to say that was the first time that I fully opened up to my friends and family about the disease I had. And that is when a ton of people in my life learned that I had this disease, and I was very open about it. And, I would train for the half marathon every weekend. They kind of assigned like a marathon trainer to you, and you would go meet them at public parks and beaches and things like that. And you would slowly train up to running the 13 miles. So the event was running from Napa to Sonoma, and then they give you wine at the end, and it's a whole fun thing. And that event, I'm so grateful for it, because that is where I met so many wonderful friends that I have now. A lot of them are mothers of their kids who have Crohn's or colitis, but they are still some of the best people in my life. They still continue to support me, message me, check in with me, and I do with them, vice versa. And it's just been a lovely experience. And if that's something you've been considering doing through the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, I would definitely recommend it, because it was a lot of fun. I hope to do it again at some point when it makes sense to do that again in my life. So after all that, I moved to LA. And as I mentioned before, I started my first career job. At the time, it was in the entertainment industry. I was working for a talent management company, and I started as an executive assistant to the president of the company. And although it was a great chance to get my foot in the door, it came with a lot of stress. A lot of stress. Probably the most stress I've ever been under in my life. The entire environment was extremely toxic and very unhealthy, but I couldn't see it because it was my first official job out of college. I had stars in my eyes, and I was just grinding away. I didn't really know what a healthy work-life balance was. I just knew that I had to pay my dues, and I wanted to get my foot in the door. And working over 12-hour days and being verbally and emotionally abused during it by my boss, and all the gambit that came with that, I saw as normal. And in the entertainment industry, there's a big culture around paying your dues, and there's a big culture around going out and getting drinks with people, and just a very unhealthy lifestyle that I had picked up. So my friends and family were kind of blaring the red lights at me, saying, Chanel, we're seeing this from the outside, and this is extremely unhealthy. You need to quit. You need to quit. You need to quit. I resisted that for a long time, but then finally, when my colitis got bad enough and I got sick enough from all the stress and the unhealthy lifestyle, I threw in the towel and I decided to quit. I had a colonoscopy that showed that my disease was really bad. And at that point, it was just kind of a wake-up call. So I quit my job. I told my roommate that I couldn't do it anymore, and I moved back home. So my parents really were supportive at that time, and they wanted me to, for the first time ever, not focus on anything except getting my health right and getting myself healthy and putting myself first and prioritizing getting my flare under control. And I had been bouncing around gastroenterologists to try and find a good fit again. A lot of them were recommending Biologics just off the bat, and at the time I wasn't comfortable with that because it was, again, daunting to me, and they didn't really talk to me about any other options. So I just felt really rushed into it, and they weren't really giving many explanations about things. They were just, that was the only thing they would recommend, and they would kind of brush me off. And I had doctors tell me that diet had nothing to do with it. They told me that because of the age that I was in, they didn't want me to sacrifice my lifestyle. So they recommended, just doing biologics to get it out of the way so I didn't have to deal with giving myself enemas or taking medication at the same time every day and things like that. And that just wasn't sitting right with me. So my parents and I really wanted to look at the option of doing it as holistically as possible. So I quit my job. I lived with my parents for a while. I bought a bunch of books about diet with ulcerative colitis and about healing autoimmune diseases and getting rid of stress. And I did yoga twice a day, every day for a long time. And I changed my diet and I altered things and I took supplements and I got allergy panels and I did all the things that I was supposed to do to get it right. And it still wasn't quite right. I finally landed with a gastroenterologist that was better than the previous ones I had been seeing. And he was really honing in on focusing on the fact that it was in that rectal part. So he specifically offered me some medical solutions that I hadn't been prompted with before. So he had recommended that I try the mesalamine enemas, the budesonide foam. These were all at different times, so I didn't try them all at once. But these were, we went through a period of just trying these different things. And they weren't that difficult to administer. They were a little definitely uncomfortable at times. They weren't the most pleasant things in the world, but it also wasn't the worst thing ever. The suppositories were definitely easier than the enemas, and the foam was a little funky as well. Those things, again, they helped a little bit, but nothing was controlling my flare. It was as if I got thrown into such a bad flare from this job and this terrible lifestyle that I just could not get out of it without steroids. So again, I got put on steroids and I stopped drinking and I just did a lot of decisions that were really good for my health. So in 2018 is really when I took a full control of all that. I made that my New Year's resolution that year to, I was going to take the little stint of steroids at the beginning of the year. I was going to wean off those, and then I was going to continue with my enemas and my budesonide foam and all the things to just try and get in the best health as possible and try and get into remission in the best way that I could without going on biologics. So that was all working kind of well. I wasn't fully out of a flare. I was still seeing blood in the toilet. I got, unfortunately, very used to seeing like horrible amounts of blood in the toilet where I would just wipe and flush it down and go about my day, and that was normal to me. I was like, that's just the disease I live with. This is a side effect of it. And I got very numb to the fact that I was seeing a toilet full of blood, truly full of blood. And that was just my reality, and it was fine, and I wasn't worried about it. And that's just kind of how I kept living life. I had these maintenance medications that were doing something, but they weren't really doing much. And then I got engaged in the summer of 2018, and all my like healthy lifestyles and living at home and all that kind of went down the drain, because then celebrations began and there were a bunch of engagement parties, and every time we went out to a restaurant or a bar, we were newly engaged, so people would buy us drinks, and that kind of just turned into a whole period of celebration. And I moved in with my now husband, and it was just kind of party time. I wasn't so focused on my health and myself anymore. So fast forward a couple years to 2020. So this ulcerative colitis support group that I joined virtually, someone in this group recommended this doctor, so I decided to look into her. And she was at Cedars-Sinai, and she was a woman. In the about 19, 20 years at the time that I had had the disease, I had never been seen by a woman gastroenterologist. And that was just very fascinating to me, to have a woman. I had never even really thought about it because every doctor I'd ever been recommended or referred to or given was a man. And so the idea of having a woman was very comforting to me and very exciting to me. So I made my appointment with her, and I did my first colonoscopy with her. I think I forgot to say, back around the college time, I started going from 3 colonoscopies a year to yearly colonoscopies so that they could really keep an eye on the situation and make sure any polyps were removed that needed to be removed, and just keep an eye to make sure that they didn't see anything cancerous. So by this point, I'd been having yearly colonoscopies, so I scheduled my next one with her. And after we were done with the colonoscopy, we were talking, and I was telling her that my husband and I were planning to get pregnant soon. And she looked at me and she said, "What are you talking about? You're still in a flare. You're not in remission." And I said, "What are you talking about?" No one has ever told me that my ulcerative colitis and pregnancy have anything to do with each other. And she looked at me a little bit baffled and apologetically and said, "I'm so sorry, honey, but they do have to do with each other. They very much affect each other and can very much play a big part in one another." And I had my world rocked again, because I felt very not deceived, but I felt like I could have known this information so long ago. I understand maybe not bringing it up with a pediatric patient of yours, because at that point you're still a kid. But by the time I was 18 and having conversations with these male doctors, you would think if they had my best interest in mind that they maybe would mention, "By the way, you're a woman. In the future, if you're ever thinking about getting pregnant, just know that these being in a flare or having active disease will impact that pregnancy. So make sure and, do your research on it." Or here's a pamphlet like my current woman doctor did for me. They had a whole website of resources for me that was specifically about pregnant women with IBD. It was a little devastating at the time because my husband and I had planned to start trying, and all of a sudden I was faced with the reality that I was in a current flare, and if I did not get that flare under control, that I would not have a healthy pregnancy. So essentially, after I found out that news, I was ready to do anything to get my flare under control, because being a mother has been my dream for as long as I can remember. So at that point, I didn't want to wait any longer. I felt that through the 20 years that I had this disease, that I had really given it every shot that I could in every regard. I took a year off of work and school and quite literally only focused on my health. I did the allergy panels, I did the yoga and the meditation, and stopped stressing, and read all the books and tried all the diets, and I did all the medications that I could. I took the mesalamine, I did the enemas, I did the foams, I did the suppositories, I did the steroids, I did everything that my doctors recommended aside from biologics. I had exhausted every option. And I just kind of hit this wall where I said, you know what? Nothing has put me in true remission in as long as I can remember. I don't remember the last time one of my doctors came to me and said, "Chanel, you're in remission." I couldn't remember the last time. So I took the plunge and I asked my doctor about the biologic she recommended. And she recommended Entyvio. So that was a scary hurdle, because once you are on biologics, you're on them for life, and it's immunocompromising, and there's all these scary small print things that come with it, but also it can change your life for the better, which I think I was really at the time looking into the negatives, every risky thing about it. I wasn't looking at all the positives that could happen. So I finally took the plunge. I said yes to the Entyvio, and I started my loading doses in the summer of 2021. And I believe they have to do 3 doses kind of back to back. And then I had an infusion every 8 weeks from that point forward. So I believe my calprotectin levels before the biologics were in the thousands. And then they tested me when I had been on the biologics for a while, and it dropped down to 8, which was just bonkers to see the numbers go from the thousands to 8. And that was when I was sold. I was like, okay, I'm a believer. Biologics are great. And not only was that in my levels, but I also saw changes in my symptoms too. The bleeding had stopped. So I was no longer seeing blood every time I went to the restroom, which was a huge relief. The occasional abdominal pain I would have wasn't very present. And another big symptom of mine was urgency. And the urgency calmed down a bit. It wasn't perfect, but it did calm down a bit. So because my levels were so great, I basically got the green light that I could start trying for pregnancy. And we did just that. And we got pregnant. And throughout the pregnancy, I did stay in remission, which is wonderful. So what my doctor told me is if you go into pregnancy in a flare, you will likely stay in a flare throughout the pregnancy, which can be really detrimental to yourself and possibly the baby. But if you go into pregnancy in remission, your body tends to stay in remission. However, after you have that baby and all your hormones get funky again, and the progesterone is gone or it comes in or something like that, flares tend to happen a lot. And that did happen with me. I didn't get into an awful flare, but it was definitely worse than what I had just gone through the previous 9 months. So they checked my levels again, and they were, I think, in the 50s or so. So they did change my infusion schedule from every 8 weeks to every 6 weeks, which is now my current infusion schedule. And although today I am still not in true remission, my colonoscopies are still showing like level 1 disease, which thankfully is the lowest, but it's not true remission anymore. We're still looking into, what to do to improve that. And of course, all these now things happening with the abscess and the fistula, and that's a new fun development of my ulcerative colitis, and it's potentially throwing me into the Crohn's patient world. I think I mentioned this in one of my previous videos. We're gonna have to wait and see. If this is a isolated event, then it can just be a side effect of having ulcerative colitis and getting that abscess and developing a fistula. But in the case that more fistulas develop in the next year or years, then that will deem me as having moved into now having fistulizing Crohn's disease. So doesn't change a lot about my disease and everything that I'm currently used to. It'll just reclassify me as a Crohn's patient. So that's why on this channel I say it talking about Crohn's and colitis, because I'm not really sure in the moment where I stand. I just know I've got IBD, and it's definitely been ulcerative colitis for most of my life, but at this point it might be evolving. So that's kind of a summary of my story. If you have any specific questions about any of those time periods of my life, please leave a comment. I'm happy to expand further in another video about any of those specific details. I want to make more specific videos about the medications that I've been on, about pregnancy and having IBD, about recommendations just about what to ask your doctors, my experience with different doctors throughout the years. I have a bunch of ideas for multiple videos as we wait for the current live updates about everything that's going on with my fistula and my disease at the moment. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is my story. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you guys have a lovely new year, and please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on CCCC TV.